Okay, so this session is going to explore Auslan and elements of Auslan. So again, we've got Ishtar in the room to provide tech support. We don't seem to have a chat function in this Teams, so put up your hand if you've got a problem. Just to remind you that this and all sessions are being recorded, so if anything you say might be available to people watching the recording. Keep your microphones off, put your hand up if you've got a question. And now I'd like to introduce Janine Hall and Cathy Prior. Janine did postgraduate studies in education of deaf children with multiple disabilities at Gallaudet University in Washington, DC. So Janine's first language is ASL, American Sign Language. She came back to Australia, initially teaching deaf-blind students and then deaf hard of hearing and students with language delay and communication disorder. Currently, she's a teacher consultant with TAFE New South Wales, supporting students who are deaf or hard of hearing, and she's also been a co-teacher in the Auslan certificate. And Cathy Prior. Cathy's worked in and used keyword sign in the disability sector in a variety of roles for over 20 years. She developed a passion for Auslan and a connection with the local deaf community. Currently, Cathy has a number of hats. She's a keyword sign presenter and Victorian state trainer. She's a teacher and coordinator of Cert 4 Community Services at Wodonga TAFE and lead practitioner within the practice and assessment team at Connections. And unfortunately, Jayde Mott wasn't able to join us today. So let's kick off. We're just going to have a conversation about Auslan in this session. Janine, maybe I'll start with you. Can you give us a bit of a history of Auslan?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Brief history of Auslan.
Potted history.
Potted history. Yes, please.
Okay. So Auslan was actually, it's been around since First Fleet. It was brought over with various different communities who established residential schools for the deaf. Hence the variety in terms of regional differences. Irish nuns, British, a whole range. Basically, the Auslan Sign's based on British Sign Language, whereas the American has a history in French. And I guess the important thing for us is that Department of Education and teaching for many, many years was fully oral. It was fully oral when I started with the department in '79. We used to do covert classes for parents in signing. There were no resources at that time. We got the Green Book, which is the signed English book, in '82. And that's not Auslan. That's some Auslan signs, but it's also a contrived system with grammatical markers and a whole lot of introduced words that don't exist in Auslan. And it's also fully English word. Someone speaking Auslan, truly speaking Auslan to you, they cannot use their voice. So that's always a good marker. If someone says, I'm using Auslan, and they're speaking at the same time, they're not using Auslan. People will mouth when they're using Auslan to assist with lip reading, but other than that, they're using English, which is very different word order. So the Auslan language was recognised in the mid-'80s, and it was more towards the end of the '80s, I think like '89, that Trevor's first dictionary came out, which is the Red Book. It's a great book if you ever get hold of it. And then the one that is still current now wasn't published until the, I think, late '90s. So, yeah, there are lots of different systems, but they're systems, not languages. So that's something that we have to remember very, very much. That's it. That's the red one. If you've got it, hang on. Yours looks really good, Cathy. Mine looks like it's, yeah, been out in the rain.
I had a friend find it at a garage sale and I made her snaffle it up for me.
That's brilliant. If you get it,
Trevor Johnson is what's known as a coder, a child of deaf adults. So Trevor's first language was sign language.
Yes.
And generally coders are best interpreters, have excellent, well, clearly excellent knowledge of sign language. Okay, Cathy, to you, I think one of the things that we often say in the keyword sign world is, well, that it's really important that we don't talk about keyword sign as sign language. We need to, well, it's really important to us that we operate with respect for the language of the deaf community. Cathy, I know you've got quite a bit to say about that. Do you want to add on to what I've just said?
Absolutely. So we need to be very clear when we're doing keyword sign presentations or workshops that we are not teaching sign language, nor are we using sign language. We are borrowing our signs from the Australian Sign Language Auslan. We need to pay respects to that language that allows us to use their signs in this way, and the culture that comes with that. There certainly is mixed feeling often in the deaf community around the use of their signs in keyword sign. And I think part of the way we need to move to ensure that we're bridging that gap is about paying respect to where the signs are coming from, and being very, very clear with our participants that we are not teaching, nor are we using sign language. Even as a presenter who has a background in sign language, I kind of sometimes walk a fine line with both worlds. But I'm very, very clear that when I'm doing keyword sign that we appreciate and we borrow our signs from the Auslan language and from the deaf community, and that in order to pay respect to that, we need to ensure that we are using them correctly and for the right purpose.
And there have been a number of instances, I guess, where the deaf community has, or some in the deaf community, because I think like any community, it's a very broad thing and you can't just say the deaf community says X.
Absolutely.
Some in the deaf community are unhappy with the use of signs from their language being used in a different way. Can we explore that just a little more as well?
Yeah, there are certainly pockets of the deaf community who feel that their language or their culture has been appropriated by others. I don't think it's necessarily focused initially on keyword sign. It was other areas, for example, hearing people using it to get financial gain or notoriety in their performances. But keyword sign has certainly become a part of that discussion, in that people are profiting or using their language in inappropriate ways. And I think some of that may come from a misunderstanding of how keyword sign is taught and used. And unfortunately, some of that comes from people who have done workshops who haven't understood that they're not learning sign language, that they're not doing sign language, and they've continued this narrative that's actually incorrect, which is why I'm very, very passionate about ensuring that our facilitators understand the difference between keyword sign and Auslan, and how to ensure that we're imparting that importance to participants of our workshops as well.
Okay, great. Now, another thing I think that's interesting these days in terms of Auslan as a language is what changes have happened, or what's the impact of the massively grown connectedness, international connectedness, because of all the different technology platforms we've got. So how has that impacted sign language, knowing that sign languages are different across the world? So American Sign Language looks very different to Australian Sign Language, to Vietnamese Sign Language, and so on and so on and so on. So deaf people are making more connections across the world internationally. What's that done to Auslan? Janine, do you want to kick off on that first?
Sure. We've always had what we used to call imported signs. So one example would be the sign for parents, which is relying on the one-handed or American P sign, and has a long history in terms of I love you's the other one. Yep, and that has very mixed feelings in terms of where it's used and abused. But there is linguistic background to a lot of those. When we receive them and embed them in the language, then we don't necessarily have that history, but they sometimes move into common usage. Other times they stay on the fringe. A lot of the technical signs, there's a range, but really we can't adopt those until they're adopted by the community. It's not our role to do that. We have to be careful.
Absolutely. And if I can add to that, I guess certainly the use of sign language in multimedia, in social media platforms has also seen a increase in particularly ASL that has crept its way into frequent use here in Australia through Auslan. Looking at the history of the introduction of ASL, it actually did come from a lot of the deaf schools. So the first lot of signs that were adopted often were educational, technical based, as Janine was saying. But what we're seeing now is it's more the social signs because they're coming through from the social media and multimedia platforms. We're seeing more deaf characters in movies. We're seeing more interpreter use. And so those signs are creeping their way in. There are kind of, again, two very different camps inside the deaf community. There's a very core true to Auslan camp where they're very passionate about ensuring that we grow our own language here in Australia rather than borrowing or having signs from other countries. And then there's another camp that welcomes the use of other signs because it's extending their use of expression in Australia.
Which I guess kind of, I hope I'm not stealing your question, Libby, is it leads us into there's a predominance under the baby sign commercial activities that is very ASL American Sign based, and you really do need to raise that in workshops if you're a presenter and hit that on the head early, because you don't have to pay for signing for kids, babies or whatever. There's a lot of resources that are keyword sign and Auslan based, and to introduce the ASL ones is really problematic.
And I think, you know, we have I've had a conversation about this previously, but there's a lot of misunderstanding around baby sign and where it comes from. And I've had many a participant and parent say, oh, we got baby sign and we've been using it and it's fantastic. And they'll show me some of their signs and they are all ASL, and they do not understand that what they're doing is ASL. There's no information in the kit that they've purchased and been sent that it's not Australian based. And so there's a lot of misconceptions out there around it.
And baby signing is quite big in America, and I think in the UK as well. I don't think it's quite so big here, but I think there's growing interest in it. And I guess I think what's important for people to understand in all of these different signing terms or systems is who are they for and what's the purpose, you know? And again, I think that comes back to the fundamental difference between Auslan, which is the language of a community, as opposed to keyword sign, which is a communication tool for supporting people with communication difficulties. Baby sign is often introduced to typically developing children before they start speaking. So that's a different kind of demographic, a different target group, and to some extent a different purpose. I think a lot of people who are excited and support baby sign will say things like it makes children smarter, it makes them develop language quicker. I don't know that we absolutely know that that's true. I think often sign is a fun thing to do and kids do pick it up quite quickly. And yeah, I think, you know, what's really important in that is that people are using Auslan signs at the very least.
Absolutely.
I don't know, is it interesting to people to hear a bit more about signed English? I think it is still used in some places, more in New South Wales than anywhere else. Janine, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Predominantly, signed English initially was the only thing the Department of Education had, and it was embraced. It tends to linger in SSP, Schools for Specific Purposes for Children with Complex Disabilities, because they have the green book or the yellow book, and that's what they've been using. Their signs, it's not so much that the grammatical signs are a problem. but in terms of use in the broader community, but probably more so is for New South Wales, the signs are Melbourne based and they also aren't contextual. So teachers would get the sign for, and a good example is the sign for park. And so you would have the sign for park your car as different to park or swing in the park. Very different meanings if you're telling a child to go there. So things like that, it was like no one sign for everything. And that was really unfortunate because that's how sign language, sign English started, when teachers embraced it and said, no, this is the sign. That's the one in the book. That's the one we use because it's spelt the same and it's the same word. That created an absolute furor in the deaf community and was part of the demise of signed English, well and truly. It was not applied properly at all from a linguistic background.
Okay. Okay, that's going to lead us on to the next kind of area of this, but I noticed, Emily, you had your hand up. Have you got a question? If so, can you unmute yourself and speak?
Thanks, Libby. It was more of a comment from my own experience, having gone through university in the probably about year 2000, I'd say now, speech pathology degree. We were taught signed English, which I was later surprised about, but there were still changes happening in the Queensland Education Department, I believe, even at that point. And I then started working with the Department of Education and came to learn about those changes and the switches across from Auslan. But I think there was a lot of litigation around that as well in Queensland that sort of led to that change. But I was surprised that we were still learning signed English that late. And I know that pretty soon after that, I'm pretty sure they switched across to keyword sign as part of the course. Just a comment. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to selecting signs for use. Just kind of following on, I guess, from the last little bit that Janine was talking about. So if people start using keyword sign, often what they do is go to a basic workshop, learn a selection of starter vocabulary of signs to kick off. And then inevitably you need to know more signs than that. So often people will go to, well, in the past, until recent months, the keyword sign app, which was great. And I'll talk more about the app later in the day. Or people go to Signbank. And I think that can be at times confusing for people, really. You can look up a word and find that there may be 7 variations for that word. So I'd like to talk a bit now about, I guess, general principles we might apply when we want to go to Signbank and look for signs to use in keyword sign. Either of you can start off on that.
Well, I think Janine's, sort of started the conversation in the previous comment around context. And for me, context becomes really important. And it's not always easy to see that in Signbank. You type the word in that you're looking for. And in English, we know there are lots of words that sound similar, spelt similar in terms of how we use them, but it's around the context. And so there might be multiple variants available on Signbank, but it's really important to check the context, and they do have that information there, additional for the sign. And so looking at why would I use that? So I know, for example, if you look up the sign for dog, there's 4 variants, and one of them, for example, is around bark. So they're not actually using that sign for the word dog, they're using that sign for bark. But it's attached to when you look up dog, it's attached there because it's around the the description of or use of.
Okay, Janine, you want to?
Yeah, no, it gets very tricky because often signs they're very close, and so some signs will change the meaning will be totally opposite to what you intend. So it's always really good if you're introducing a new sign, one that's not part of the basic vocab that you're confident about, then you actually do need to do your research first. Ask questions, ask keyword sign get people to do, put their feelers out and find exactly where it's used, what it's used. I may say something, but it may not be appropriate for your locality.
Which to some extent takes us back to regional variation, but there are also a lot of little pockets of variation all around the country. So, educating yourself to some extent on what signs are used in your area, perhaps find a consultant person, somebody who is familiar with Auslan to go to ask. Certainly I go to Janine and Cathy and others often, tell me what sign I should be using for this or that. I'm wondering if it might be useful to have a look at Signbank now and maybe look up a sign just to illustrate what we're talking about here.
Yeah, just before we move on to that, though, I think one important thing to say is when, for example, Libby reaches out to me, even if I know the sign or I think I know the sign, the first thing I do is put that out across my contacts within the deaf community, because that's the way that I pay respect to the language. This is not my language. It's not my story to tell. So even though I may know the sign or be fairly confident, I'm still going to consult with the deaf community before I give that information to someone else.
And Emily, I think you've got your hand up again.
Sorry, this is a question, this one. So I was looking up some fringe vocabulary for my session this afternoon, and I noticed that for two words in particular I was trying to look up, there is no sign for those words on Signbank. So those words are mud, which I've substituted dirty because I felt that it fitted the context. Struggling with cave, so I'm just using gesture instead. However, I was curious as to why there is no sign listed for those two words in particular, and I'm sure there are others.
There are plenty. So there is not a sign for every word in the English language. There are signs for context. So there might be a sign that's similar but used in different contexts. For example, the sign for same, which is something I can't really do because I've broken my wrist, but the sign for same, I might use that for similar, alike, me too. So there's different ways that I would use that same sign with the same context but for a different word. However, there isn't a sign, as I said, for every word, and in Auslan that would then be finger spelt. So we might be using other signs to give context and then would finger spell the word. So we might use dirty, we might use messy, depending on the context of what the mud is. We might be using that it's really thick or that the car got stuck in it, but then I would finger spell the word mud to give the further context to what I'm talking about. Because again, I'm using that in a full language. I'm using that in Auslan grammatical structure. In keyword sign, we're doing that very, very differently. So we might not be finger spelling depending on the person that we're working with. So the use of the sign dirty in that context is fine.
And I think with keyword sign, I mean, there are a few considerations when we're choosing signs to use with keyword sign from Auslan as the language, when there's possibilities, maybe two different versions that are both national. Often what we choose to use is the sign with the easier handshake, thinking again of our target population. But I think that contextual thinking is really
the Q&A, like more discussion session.
we've got some sound off.
I think it's
my video off.
Can you mute, please?
I'm not sure who it is.
All right, I'll keep going. So we've talked about context. Janine gave that example of park. It's one I remember coming across decades ago. Going, well, that's not right. That's park the car. That's not right. I can't use that. And that's when I think I was still looking at the Green Book, which is the signed English book. Other examples like that, one struck me the other day, water. If I'm talking about watering the garden, I'm not going to use the sign water, like I want a glass of water. I'm probably going to do a gesture of watering the garden. Yeah, so whereas in Auslan, people will often finger spell when there isn't a sign for it. I think for keyword sign, what we're looking at doing is going to gesture. And we're also looking at selecting which sign is right for our context. And it means you've got to think about it, Because often
Absolutely.
we're not signing necessarily a literal translation of the words we're saying. We're signing the meaning of the message that we're trying to send.
And ultimately what we're doing is adding a visual layer to verbal communication. So as we're talking before with Auslan, the voice is off. It's about communication. It's a whole language structure in itself. Whereas with keyword sign, we're adding a visual layer to our verbal communication. So moving back to gesture, particularly in context, becomes important. So we've got the sign for open, but I'm not going to say, will you open the jar? I'm going to say, will you open the jar? I'm not going to say, will you open the door, if the door, is a sliding door. So again, it's about thinking very clearly about the context. The same with, on and off. Am I turning a light switch on and off, or am I turning a tap on and off? So being very clear about the context and the use of it, because that visual layer is what we're using it for.
Excellent. All right. Any questions at this point? I know we normally leave them till the end, but we're not.
We're flexible.
Yeah. Yes, there is. I'm not sure how to say your name. Sui?
It's Xiaowen.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. So if a child has learned the American sign for a few words for various reasons, would you then, and they live in New South Wales, would you introduce the New South Wales keyword sign for those words, or use the sign that the child already uses, or the gestures that the child already uses, and then teach the new words in the New South Wales keyword sign? Would it confuse the child, or would the child just pick up as if he was picking up two languages or dialects?
I guess it depends a little bit on the reason as to why they've picked up the ASL sign, and is there a version of it in Auslan? But you can pair it. So for example, if you've got someone already who's using a keyword sign or Auslan sign but hasn't quite got the hand shape right, we would always sign the correct one. So you can accept their signing, you can pair the correct or the Auslan or the keyword sign version of it with it, so that eventually they may swap to start using yours, or the one that you believe is correct for the context. So I would go with pairing it. I don't know about what your thoughts are on it, Janine.
Yeah, no, I would definitely do that. Probably just before I do that, I'd look at family background, because if they're using that in the broader family, then, and that is not going out, huge community, then I probably would respect that as well, because we have a lot of, the Singapore signs and a lot of signs from the Asian communities that actually are based on American signs. So we have to be very careful about making that transition, looking where it's used for the person, and if they do need it to, we do need to change, or we can accommodate.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. There may be a cultural reason or a family history reason, so absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
So probably the main benchmarks in that are respect any attempt at communication, acknowledge it, don't tell anyone they're wrong, find out why that's the sign that's being used, and really think about what's the environment that person is using that sign in, or other signs like that, because whatever we're doing, we want to support communication, build a bridge to better communication rather than create some kind of communication barrier. So it, like everything, it just needs a little bit of contemplation, really. Okay, so what do you think? Will we have a look at Signbank and pick a sign that could be a bit tricky and see how we might navigate that?
Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, you drive, Cathy, then I don't have to think about it. That's great.
All right, one moment, please.
Can I ask a question? Can I be let in to the meeting? I can hear it, but I can't see it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've just had the same issue, and it was the app. So I actually went and joined in the browser because the app was still showing the last meeting I was in. Just thought I'd try it there.
I might try again then. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so I have Signbank open. Libby, what would you like me to look up?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I remember, unless either of you have got a good idea, I remember years ago being about to say to a child, don't talk to the teacher, she's busy, because she was, and thought, I don't know the sign for busy. So went home and that night and looked it up, and there were many variations of busy, and it was quite fascinating to look through all of them. So let's do that one.
All right. So it's on its way. Unfortunately, my computer can be a little bit slow when I'm sharing screens. So I have busy and busybody as my first option. So we're going to go with busy.
So for those new to Signbank, it just put in your search Auslan Signbank, you'll get that homepage. You've got the search function up the top there. Put in the word you want. First thing to check really is how many variations there are. In this case, there are 7. You go, oh my God, okay, I better look at every single one of those and work out what the best one is. And you also want to pay attention to the little map under the video screen, so that you're settling on a variant that suits the area that you're living in. Okay, Cathy.
Okay, and as well as looking at the sign definition, because this is where you'll also find context as to whether it's being used in the correct context. We then have a video available, which hopefully will work. So I'll replay that. We also have the option of putting it into full screen to make it clearer to see.
And
I'll go to the second.
Slowing them down if you want to get a closer look at the hand shape or exactly which way they're moving.
Yes, so let's do that.
As well. All right, so that's one version of busy, and you can see in the description lots of things are happening or being done. So it's kind of like moving things around. I think of it as, you know, kind of fairly busy with some kind of activity or busy at your desk. Let's look at another version.
It's on its way.
Okay, so busy working, busy with something with physical or mental effort.
And you can see this sign's very close to the sign for work,
Yes.
which is why the context is then around labour, work, toil, etc.
Okay, another one.
So this is busy as in traffic or thoroughfare. Go to the fourth.
So you'll often see signs that where the fingers, when we do one person, the fingers can actually indicate many. So you could have a lot of people going back and forth, passing on a pathway.
Absolutely. This is another one related to traffic, and so of multiple traffic. And because the fingers are now horizontal, we're no longer talking about people, we're actually talking about vehicles.
This is probably the moment that really opened my eyes, I guess, to all the variants that are possible and the importance of context.
Okay, I'll replay this one. This is the sign that I know as busy, as in I'm busy doing things or I've had a busy day.
So it's like running around all over the place with lots of stuff.
Which is, that one's closely related to the first one with the flat hands.
Yes.
Yes. And so far, in terms of our map, they've had usage all over Australia, but remembering one may be more common in some areas, depending on context.
All right, we might look at one more because I've just noticed the time and it's time for us to finish up for the next session. So let's look at the last one, or the second last one.
That's what happens with our technology.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So this one
you
is,
can't get through because it's busy.
yeah, it can't get through because, like, for example, the phone's engaged, there's a barrier or there's an obstacle. I'll play that one more time. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we have to, you know, we could talk about this for ages. I love talking about sign language and Auslan and so forth. Thank you very much, Cathy and Janine. And thanks to everybody who came to listen. We're going to end this now so we can start the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Isn't this the same link?
Is it the same link? Ish, can you tell me it's the same link? I think perhaps not.
I think it depends on which session you want to go to.
Yeah, I think it is the same link. So stay in here if you want to stay for Stephanie and no, hang on, who have we got next?
Yes, it's me.
It's Steph. Okay, so stay to listen to Steph or jump out and find the link to the stream that you want to be in. All right, so I'll just start with the same bit of information. So this session is with Stephanie Weir using keyword sign to read Weir's spot. Those that haven't caught up with this yet, we've got Ishtar in the room providing tech support. Put up your hand if you've got that
and log into the same link.
The chat functioning, unfortunately. A reminder that this and every session are being recorded, so anything that you say might be available to people watching the video, and we'll keep your microphones off unless you're asking a question, and pop up your hand if you want to ask a question. Okay, so now I want to introduce Stephanie Weir. Steph is the speech pathologist. She's used keyword sign and before that Makaton, so that says something about how old she's been doing it, in her work supporting adults and children with communication disability over 15 years. Steph's the Victorian representative to the Agoski National Executive and the Australian representative to the International ISAC Council. For people who don't know, ISAC is the International Society of Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So it's the international body that supports all forms of communication that support people with little or no speech. And Agoski is the Australian organisation that supports the use of AAC. Steph's currently completing her PhD in children's rights and AAC and doing a lot of signing with her 6-month-old. Okay, Steph, over to you.
Hi everyone. So as Libby said, today I'm going to talk just a little bit about using keyword signing while you're reading a book. I've been doing this a lot lately with my 6-month-old baby. So I just thought I'd share with you a little bit about what we've been doing. I would like for this to be as interactive as possible. You know, that's the purpose of introducing keyword signing, particularly with little ones. And so I will be asking for contributions as we go along. Believe me, I know this book very well and I can certainly sign to it. In fact, my 6-month-old at the moment, when I bring it out to practice, after a week of doing it a lot, she's starting to close the book when I bring it out, which, you know, how clever is that? But still, we've certainly been doing it a lot in this house this week. So I'll certainly be looking for other people to make contributions about what you think the keywords might be as we're going through and what signs you think would be ideal to be talking about when we go through each page. I'll just share my screen. Bear with me. Okay, is that working? Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so you can see the PowerPoint.
Yep.
Okay, because it's not showing up for me, but that's fine as long as everybody else can see it. So yeah, I was hoping that we would have a chat function for this activity, but it doesn't seem to be working. So I'll just rely on people to feel confident speaking up and making contributions. What do we think, Libby? We've got, how many people? We've got 50 people in the room. So should we just trust people to unmute and contribute themselves?
Yeah, put up your hand if you want to ask something or make a comment, and we'll see that and invite you to speak.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so I just thought I'd start by talking a little bit about interactive book reading, or we also call it joint book reading or shared book reading. It's a method that we use to promote language and literacy skills in young children. So the main aspect that distinguishes interactive book reading from other reading methods is that the roles of reader and listener are interchanged between children and adults during the reading. So our goal with using an interactive method around a book is to spark an interaction. You know, we're not just requiring a child to be a passive recipient of the story. We're looking to build their language. Excuse me. You know, and we're just using a book as the context or the object around which we're doing that. So we want to open up a dialogue with a child as much as possible, rather than just reading a story to them. And to do that, we need to use some strategies to keep a child engaged with the book. So some of the strategies that we can use that I've popped on the slide here are that as much as possible, we want to facilitate some turn taking with the child. And when we're thinking about encouraging a child to take turns, we can pause and wait. Pausing and waiting is always going to be one of your primary strategies to give a child a chance to process and respond to something that you've said, or give them the cue that maybe it's their turn to take a turn in the interaction. We want to make comments as much as possible, both about what's happening in the story and what you can see on the page as well. So making lots of comments can model vocabulary, grammatical structures, and can also model different purposes for communication, which I think anyone who was in Nicola's presentation this morning would have heard a lot about. Things like making an observation, sharing information, sharing a joke, you know, things that can have absolutely nothing to do with the story, but is just, you know, communication that's happening between the two of you. We want to use repetition as much as possible. So repeating key vocab throughout the story, even if it's not in the text, so that the child hears it multiple times and has lots of opportunity to make meaning of what you've said, or in this case, what you've signed. Gives a child a lot of models of the language that you're introducing to them. Excuse me. We want to ask, if you are going to ask questions, we want to make sure that they're open-ended questions, and that you're asking them as a really active listener. So remember that this isn't a time to be testing a child's language skills and, you know, asking them, you know, maybe something like, oh, what colour is it? When, you know, I know what colour it is. And again, Nicola was talking about this really beautifully this morning, which I think dovetails really nicely with the point that I want to make here. You know, there's no point asking a child something that you already know. What we really want to know, and we want to show respect for the child as well, we want to know, what can you see? What do you think? You know, let me a little bit more into your world, because that's the purpose of language and that's the purpose of communication. So yeah, when you do ask questions, making sure we're asking open-ended questions rather than closed questions just require a yes or a no or a one-word response and then really shut down the interaction. So overall, making comments and questions should encourage a child to talk in more detail or communicate in more detail. It might not be through talking, it might be through signing, it might be through gesture, it might be through, you know, looking, if they're not using their speech yet, and that's why we're introducing sign. So we're really looking to just use all of these strategies to keep the child engaged with the book. which just reading a story on its own might not do. And lastly, for those children who, when they are engaging with the book, we want to think about expanding on the answers and comments that they're providing. So if the child's providing, you know, a one-word answer, like we're talking about where's Spot, so they might say doggy, or they might sign doggy. So you might respond by expanding that into a short phrase, something like, yes, that's a doggy. His name is Spot. Spot's a cheeky doggy, you know, or something like that. And for little ones who aren't talking yet, we might just be modelling simpler comments. So we might be modelling single words or single signs. We might even be expanding on their gestures or just responding to their interest. So lots of strategies that you can use in addition to your signing to keep a child engaged around a book. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch a little bit here on, you know, what we're doing when we're choosing vocabulary around a book. Obviously, we're thinking about using our gesture and the interactive vocab as much as possible. But if you're thinking about choosing some additional vocabulary that you might want to model as you're going through the book, for the most part, you're going to be talking about what's on the page. So, you know, you are going to be guided by that. But then there are also, you know, other principles that we think about, and anybody who's done a keyword sign workshop, or if you're here because you're a keyword sign presenter, you'll be very familiar with these principles. We always think about, first and foremost, things that are motivating to the individual, because that's the crux of communication, is having a reason to communicate. So communicating about something that's motivating is going to be a really important thing to think about. Thinking about vocabulary that the child will have a frequent opportunity to use if it's something that enters their vocabulary, that allows them to communicate using a range of language functions, which we've already talked about, and thinking about a range of vocabulary types, so verbs or action words, and then describing words as well, like texture, size. I just put emotion and behaviour there for things like, oh, you know, that dog is naughty, or, you know, that monkey is cheeky, and things like that. Essentially, we want to be thinking about not just offering nouns or names for things, which don't really give a lot of opportunity for interactive communication if the child starts using those words, or those signs rather. And then we also want to be thinking about using that vocabulary that the child might be able to use with different communication partners. So essentially, we're looking at vocabulary that a child can use across a lot of different contexts. And again, we come back to that concept of interaction. What can the child use to interact with others? Excuse me. Okay, so we're going to be putting all of that into practice by reading through Where's Spot together and thinking about some signs that we might use as we go. So as I said, in the spirit of interactive book reading, I'll need you to help me make this as interactive as possible. So without the chat, we'll just ask people to speak up or maybe raise your hand, and Libby or someone else might invite you to contribute. So as we go through, I'm going to be asking you to identify the keywords in the text. Think about some extra comments that you can make about what's happening in the pictures, and then we'll be thinking about the signs that you could be using. Firstly, we'll be thinking about, obviously, as I said, natural gesture and the interactive vocabulary, but then we can talk about additional signs or fringe vocabulary that you might need to look up as well. And I've done my best to prepare for, you know, most things that might come up, so hopefully we won't have to go to the Signbank, but we'll see how we go. And remember that this is a lift the flap book as well, so we'll talk about that as well, you know, the interaction that we're actually going to be doing with the book. So something like, you know, oh, let's have a look, let's lift it up, or something like that. That can also be interaction that we can have around the book, because the book is an object as well. So for the cover, to introduce, you know, the activity, or talk about the activity that we're going to do, how might we start? How would we introduce this to a child? Any thoughts?
Okay, now I've got to find who's got there. Jennifer, you've got your hand up.
Could you say like this book is called or the name of this book is?
Yeah, absolutely. You might say, we're going to read a book today, and it's called Where's Spot? Now, I'll just start out by saying often when I do this as well, I just model dog for Spot rather than the first letter of his name. I just thought I'd stick with that today so that I don't have to keep moving the camera up and down. So yeah, so we might start off with that. The book is called Where's Spot? We might even say something like, and it's written by Eric Hill. And I'll just make a disclaimer here actually before I start. Two things. Firstly, because we were just having the conversation about Auslan and regional variation, I'm using the southern signs. I'm in Melbourne, so for anybody who's following along from other places in the country, you might need to, if you're thinking about using this activity, you might need to go off and look up and make sure all of the signs are appropriate to where you are. Excuse me.
So just to add to that, that's particularly for people in New South Wales and Queensland who'd be using northern signs. Not every sign is different for people who are fairly new to keyword sign, but some are in particular colours, but there are others that do vary between southern and northern. And Joanne's got her hand up.
Just a quick question. The first time you might say, you know, where's Spot, do you spell the full name or would you only ever always just use the first letter?
It's a good question. I mean, and it's one that I might, after I answer, throw to Libby and make sure that that she agrees. I would probably just use the first letter of his name because that's usually the naming convention that we use in keyword sign. What would you say, Libby?
Yeah, I'd probably agree. You know, finger spelling's not a big part of keyword sign, as opposed to Auslan, if you're for any people who were in that previous session. I think you want to keep it as simple and as visually obvious as possible. And so your choice is going to depend a lot on the age and language level of the person that you're reading with. You might just do dog because Spot is a dog. Yeah, so again, there's a number of things to consider always. And Jennifer, you've got your hand up. Something more to say? Or is it still up from the last time?
I thought I put it down, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's fine. I'll just kick in while I've got the floor. The other thing I might say in that front cover is, oh, it looks like he's looking for Spot. So making a comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree. As I said, usually when I'm signing this, I'll sign dog rather than Spot. And in my house, we have 2 dogs, so that gives me something to jump off on as well.
Can I add something?
Yep, absolutely.
So typically, when you first introduce them, you'd finger spell the whole name. But then, could you then, once you're reading, you know, say Spot, you just assign S and then dog, depending on if there were more than one dogs in the story.
So what we were saying was that typically you would only sign the first letter of the name because that's typically what we do in keyword sign. Excuse me, as opposed to in Auslan or in the deaf community, they do spell out names. So even the first time when we're just introducing the book, I'd probably just say where's Spot or where's dog. I'd just choose one and I'd go with one or the other. I wouldn't move between the two. Because then it sort of becomes like we're doing simultaneous translation, which is the same principle when you're using 2 spoken languages. If you say something in one language and then you say it again in the other language, you're not giving the child time to process what you've said because, you know, you've said it twice and you've given 2 different languages that they need to process. So you either say it in one or the other. So I would pick one. If you're going to start the book, if you're going to introduce the book with the first letter of his name, then stick with that throughout the book. If you're going to use dog, then you stick with that throughout the book. Does that answer your question?
Yep, I think I was just kind of mixing it with Auslan a little bit, so that's good to know.
Yeah, good. And, you know, there is a little bit of fluidity here in terms of what you choose. There's not necessarily hard and fast rules. I think it does come down to what makes the most sense, as Libby said, for, you know, the child and the appropriateness of the language that you're modelling, but that's just probably what I would do. The other disclaimer that I wanted to make as well was, excuse me, so I'm left-handed. In terms of my dominant hand, I lead with my left hand for all my signing. You may have noticed I did it, I switched over for the vowels, and that's just because if I do them on my right hand, I don't have enough fingers. So I do switch over for the vowels, just in case Libby points that out to me later. That's I made an error. It's a deliberate one. So just to clarify that I know I'm not doing the vowels correctly. But yeah, otherwise I think for comments on the front cover, we might say something like that. So this is actually Spot's mum. So we might say something like that. Oh, Spot's mum is looking in a box. And then again, depending on the language skills of the child or what level we might be pitching our language at, we might prompt the child by asking a question. We might say something like, you know, what do you think she's looking for? And I did say earlier, you know, thinking about making comments and not too many questions, but I think that's an appropriate question because we're, you know, prompting the child to think beyond the book, you know, to infer about something that's happening on the page that's not directly represented. Okay, let's move on to the first page. So the text here is naughty Spot. It's dinner time. Where can he be? So what do we think the key words might be in that text when we're thinking about not signing every word, even though it's only a small amount of text?
Jennifer? No. Hand up, hand down. Danielle?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe naughty, dinner, and where?
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would do as well. Even for that first one, you know, we could sign Spot as well, but I don't think it's necessary. I think we would probably do naughty Spot. It's dinner time. Where can he be? And then as you can see there, you know, picking out the keywords, and all of them are already in the interactive vocabulary. We don't have to go looking for extra fringe vocab to get through that text. Okay, what else might we say about what's happening on the page in terms of the picture?
Jennifer, you've got your hand up, I think.
It seems to be when I put it down, it goes up, and when I put it up, it goes down.
Okay, you got a back to front hand.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Joanne?
You might say something, Mum has eaten.
Yeah.
Spot hasn't yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking that as well. So something like, oh, look, Spot's mum has eaten her food, but Spot hasn't eaten his food yet. I was also thinking that, again, in my house, we have 2 dogs. So I might say something like, oh, look, Spot and his mum have food bowls. Your dogs have bowls too. Again, you know, thinking about extending the child's language beyond the book, we're using the book as just the jumping off point for an interaction. The other thing I was thinking that we could say about this is, you know, she's said, where can he be? So we might, again, be thinking about what's appropriate to the child's language level, but for maybe a slightly older child, you might be asking a question like, what do you think Spot's mum is doing? She's walking. Where is she going? Or you could even do go in that one as well. Where is she going? And then if you're able to have an interaction with the child around, you know, maybe she's going to look for Spot, then you might say something about like, let's help her. Let's help her look for Spot. Let's turn the page and see where he is. And the reason I was thinking about that as well is because sometimes this is a fairly low-level book in terms of the language. It's fairly simple, but sometimes you might be doing a book activity with multiple children. So, you might have a very young child and you might have an older sibling who's in the room as well. And so you're thinking about how you can pitch your language to different levels, or if you're doing it, because you're here and you work in a childcare centre, you'll be thinking about differentiating the comments that you're making to keep children at different language levels engaged. So we might be thinking about things, comments as simple as, "Oh, look, it's a doggy," or we might be going, up a few steps to saying something like, "What do you think she's looking for?" Or "What do you think she's looking for?" Or "Where is she going?" So lots of different things that we could say about a relatively simple picture. Okay, I'll turn over to the next page. So what do we think here about the text to start with? What are the keywords in the text?
Danielle, I see your hands up. Is that still up or something to say?
I thought I'd put my hand down as well, but I guess we might say behind and door as the keywords.
Yeah, I think so as well. So you might say, is he behind the door? Or depending on how quickly you're speaking as well, you might even just say behind. Is he behind the door? Because always remembering as well that we don't want the signing to interrupt the communication. We don't want to, if you only know one sign, or if you're just, getting started with your signing and you're not feeling as confident, then just use one sign. Because we don't want to be concentrating so much on our signing that we're interrupting the interaction. So yeah, I think we could do that. We could either do behind the door, or we could just do behind the door. What might we say next? What else could we say about this picture?
Joanne?
Let's have a look.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so good remembering that it's a lift the flap book. So we might say something like, "I don't know if he's there. Let's have a look. Let's open the door." And then if we open the door, what would we say here? So think about the picture, but also extra comments or questions that we might make beyond the picture.
Cathy?
I was thinking, who's that?
Yep, absolutely. You could say, "Who is that?"
And Joanne? Is that a stuck hand? I think you could also say something like, "Oh, that's not Spot."
Yeah, that's not Spot.
Marion, did you have something to say as well?
I was going to say it's a bear.
It's a bear. Absolutely. That's a bear. And yeah, to say more about the picture as well, we might say, "That's a bear. Oh, and look, he's eating honey." And one thing I was saying this week to my daughter was, and he's not using a spoon to eat his honey. His paws must be very sticky. So thinking about your descriptive language as well, what describing words, texture, all those kind of things that I can throw in. What might be something else that we describe about the bear?
Cathy, something to say?
I've fallen into the hands up, hands down. Diligently turning it off. I'm thinking, is he standing on one leg? Could we talk about?
Yeah, I think he has his legs crossed. But it is kind of hard to see. But yeah, we could say something about that.
He's also very big and very brown.
Very nice.
That's a big brown bear. Absolutely. Another thing that I've been thinking about as well is something like, because there's a lot of animals in this house, so I've been thinking, you know, how did a bear get in the house? Yeah, or something like that. You know, again, thinking about the level of language that's appropriate to the child. So that might be a question for a slightly older child. But you can see, even with a fairly simple picture, there's a lot that we can say and a lot that we can sign to keep a child engaged in what's happening. All right, I'll move on to the next page. And Libby, I can't see a clock, so maybe, well, except for the one on the page.
Just under 10 minutes, Steph.
Yeah, great. I was going to say, just give me a heads up when we're sort of getting towards the end of time. Okay, so what might the keywords be in the text on this page?
Jennifer.
Inside and clock.
Yeah, I think so. So we might sign, is he inside the clock? And again, you know, both signs from the interactive vocab there. I actually think clock might be slightly different to time, which we use in the interactive vocab. But what do you think, Lib? Could we interchange clock and time, like we interchange food and eat?
Yeah, again, I'd be thinking about the language level of the child that you're reading this with. You know, how simple do you want to make it? Or as a child's language is developing, then you might be thinking, okay, I want to model new vocabulary that they don't know that's there, that they can make sense of because there's a picture as well. So I think always it's that kind of decision making of what level am I pitching any of my language at, and how much am I wanting to provide just that extra level of modelling and stimulation of new words and signs.
Yeah, always thinking about the zone of proximal development, right? The next step up. And yeah, and like you say, it can be fairly fluid as well. You know, probably just when you have gotten used to reading a book 100 times and modelling the same language, you know, the child will start coming out with more, and you'll think about pitching it a level higher. So yes, we might sign something like that. Is he inside the clock, or clock if we're doing time? And then, as you know, we did on the last page, might say something like, I don't know. Let's have a look. Let's open up the door of the clock. And then what might we say now?
Danielle.
Maybe something, oh no, that's not Spot, it's a snake.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we're thinking about sorry, I interrupted you there. What was the second part of what you said?
Oh good, the truck went past too. That's a long snake.
Yeah, that's a long snake, absolutely. You know, and I talked at the beginning about using repetition as much as possible. So absolutely, we might say something really similar to what we said on the previous page. Thinking about, again, saying something like, oh no, that's not Spot, that's a snake. That's a very long snake. What's another descriptive comment we could make about the snake?
Jennifer, is that a real hand up?
No.
Okay.
But we could say something like, you know, what do you think he's doing inside the clock?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think a snake is doing inside the clock? Or how did he get inside the clock? And then if we wanted to talk about colours, we could do that as well. He's a yellow snake with green spots, or diamonds, or, you know, whatever they are, or something like that. And I don't actually have these signs in my vocabulary, but we might talk about something like, oh, he has scales, or, you know, a snake slithers, or something like that as well. Okay, what about the next page? What do we think the keywords are on this one? In the text, sorry. Keywords in the text to start.
Just piano.
Yep, piano. And if we're thinking about, you know, we've done prepositions on the other pages as well, so we might do in as well. And the other thing I have been thinking about is, again, thinking about repetition. So when we get to a new page, we might, because it's a question here, so we might sort of state the lead into the question, which was, where's Spot? And then, yeah, and now we're on this page. Is he in the piano? And then again, thinking about our repetition, I don't know. Let's have a look. Let's open the piano. What might we say now?
Marion.
Could we say that's not Spot?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thinking about our repetition again. That's not Spot. We might say, that's a big hippopotamus. And what else might we say?
Danielle?
Hand up. Oh, look, a little bird on the hippopotamus.
Yeah, oh, look, it's a little bird. There's a little bird on his head. Absolutely. And the bird is saying, no, Spot's not here. And then again, something else I was thinking about in terms of pitching it for a slightly older child, we might say something like, oh, that's a very big piano if it can fit a hippopotamus inside. Or how do you think a hippopotamus got inside the piano? Yeah, or again, depending on the language level of the child, we might then spring off of that conversation into something else. Have you seen a hippopotamus before? Excuse me. Where did you see a hippopotamus? Or, you know, questions like that.
A couple more minutes.
Okay, great, thanks. You know, or thinking about comments. I've never seen a hippopotamus in the wild, or something like that. Okay, so I'll keep moving quickly. So what about the text here? What would we say?
I think you might go with under.
Yep.
You know, this is a lovely book for prepositions, really, isn't it? For all those location words.
Absolutely. So we might say, where's Spot? Is he under the stairs? I don't know. Let's have a look. Let's open the door. We would say, oh, no, there's a lion under the stairs. And then what I was thinking here to think about our describing words is we might say something like, oh, that's a bit scary. You better run fast, Spot's mum. You better go to a different room. Or something like that. All right, I'll keep moving through. One thing I just wanted to say about this page is we talked in the last section, you know, a lot about using our words visually and thinking about how they visually make sense. So we've done a lot of, you know, opening the door, opening the book. But for this wardrobe, which has two doors, we might do something like that. You know, we better open the wardrobe and see if he's inside. And here we might say, oh, no, that's not Spot. That's a cheeky monkey. And he's eating a banana. Where are the clothes in this wardrobe? Something like that. All right, I'll keep moving because we're almost at 11.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I think we're out of time, and I don't think we've got to finish the book. I think you've made the important thing is not the details in the book, really. It's the principles that you be thinking about, I guess. And I just mentioned that later in the day we've got Harmony Turnbull, who's doing a session on how you might plan for reading a book or doing an activity, playing a game, that kind of thing, because you could see in that Steph was using quite a bit of fringe vocab. Again, thinking, you know, you need to think about who you're reading the book with, how many words you want to use. But thank you, Steph. That was great. And I think you've shown us, okay, and there's some additional vocab, you've shown us how rich a book reading experience can be. And really that a book, reading a book is so much more than just reading the words that are on the page. There's so many opportunities for conversation, for chat, and really I think commenting is the most important thing we do in a situation like that and throughout the day. I think commenting gives us an opportunity to bring in a lot of rich language. You know, if we ask questions or tell someone to do something, largely we're using nouns and verbs. If we make a comment, more often we're going to use some describing words, some adjectives. That means that we're using much richer language and we're modelling a rich language environment. And you can do that at a fairly simple language level. And Marion, I see you've got your hand up. Last thing to say, go.
My hand is accidentally up. I am actually applauding. So thank you. That was a really, really lovely session. And I really enjoyed the reminders about interactive reading and the creative ways to use signs. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. And again, you know, with all of these things, really the main thing is to make it interactive and fun and a shared communication experience. All right, so thanks to everybody that joined us. Thanks particularly to Steph for delivering this. Time for us to have a break, go to the toilet, thank goodness, and come back. Oh, you can join the link if you've got that at your fingertips to go into a break room in Toucan. Or just go and get a nice cup of tea and have a little breather, and do come back at 11:45 for the conversation about lived experience. Thank you all.